Lieutenant Sarah Chen gripped the control stick of her P-51 Mustang as another wave of turbulence shook the aircraft. The morning fog over California was thicker than usual, and visibility was near zero. She had been flying patrol missions along the West Coast for 3 months now, but today felt different. There was tension in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. "Bluebird 2, this is Tower Control," crackled the radio in her headset. "Return to base immediately. Weather conditions are deteriorating." Sarah pressed the transmit button. "Tower Control, this is Bluebird 2. I can handle the conditions. Request permission to continue patrol." A long pause followed. She could almost hear the debate happening in the control tower. Finally, a different voice came through, Colonel Morrison, her commanding officer. "Bluebird 2, this is Colonel Morrison. Return to base immediately. That's an order." Sarah's jaw tightened. She knew what this was really about. It had nothing to do with her flying abilities or the weather conditions. Ever since she had been assigned to the 332nd Fighter Squadron 6 months ago, she had faced constant doubt and skepticism from her male colleagues and superiors. The skepticism had started on her very first day at March Field Air Base in Riverside, California. She remembered walking into the briefing room, her flight suit crisp and her boots polished to perfection. The room had fallen silent as 20 pairs of male eyes turned to stare at her. Some looked curious, others appeared skeptical, and a few seemed openly hostile. "Gentlemen," Colonel Morrison had announced, "meet Lieutenant Chen, our newest pilot." The silence had stretched uncomfortably until Captain Jake Roberts, the squadron's most experienced pilot, had spoken up. "Sir, with all due respect, shouldn't she be flying transport planes with the other women pilots?" Colonel Morrison's face had remained neutral, but Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. "Lieutenant Chen graduated top of her class from flight school, Captain Roberts. Her test scores and flight evaluations are excellent." "Test scores are one thing, sir," Roberts had replied. "But can she handle the G-forces in combat? Can she keep up with the rest of us when enemy fighters come calling?" That question had followed Sarah everywhere. During training exercises, her fellow pilots watched her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake. During briefings, she noticed how conversations would stop when she entered the room. Even the ground crew treated her differently, speaking to her slowly and carefully as if she might not understand basic mechanical concepts. Sarah had tried to prove herself through excellence. She arrived at the base earlier than anyone else and stayed later. She studied aircraft manuals until her eyes burned. She practiced aerial maneuvers until she could perform them in her sleep. Her shooting accuracy was among the best in the squadron, and her knowledge of aircraft systems was encyclopedic. But still, the doubt remained. The worst part was that some of her superiors seemed to be looking for reasons to ground her. 3 weeks earlier, during a routine training flight, she had experienced a minor engine malfunction. The problem was easily fixable, a loose connection that any experienced pilot might encounter. But instead of treating it as a routine maintenance issue, Colonel Morrison had ordered a full investigation into her pre-flight procedures. "We need to make sure you're following all safety protocols," he had explained. "Flying these aircraft is dangerous, and we can't afford any mistakes." Sarah had wanted to point out that Captain Roberts had experienced 2 engine failures in the past month, and both times he had simply filed a maintenance report and been cleared to fly the next day. But she had held her tongue. She knew that any sign of defiance would be seen as proof that she couldn't handle the pressure. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, but the message was clear. She was being held to a higher standard than her male colleagues. Now, as she banked her aircraft toward March Field, Sarah felt the familiar frustration building in her chest. She was a skilled pilot. She knew it, and deep down, she suspected that some of her colleagues knew it too. But knowing it and proving it were 2 different things. The fog was beginning to lift as she approached the airfield, and she could see the runway lights cutting through the gray morning air. Her landing was smooth and precise, touching down exactly on the center line. She taxied to her assigned parking spot and began her post-flight procedures. As she climbed out of the cockpit, she saw Captain Roberts approaching with 2 other pilots, Lieutenant Mike Torres and Lieutenant Bill Anderson. Their expressions were serious, and Sarah braced herself for another lecture about flying in poor weather conditions. "Nice landing," Roberts said, and Sarah was surprised by the genuine tone in his voice. "The tower said visibility was down to a 1/4 mile." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied cautiously. "Listen, Chen," Roberts continued, his voice dropping lower. "There's something you should know. Intelligence reports indicate increased Japanese submarine activity off the coast. There are also unconfirmed reports of possible aircraft sightings near San Francisco." Sarah's heart rate quickened. Since the attack on Pearl Harbor 4 months earlier, everyone on the West Coast had been expecting a follow-up attack. Los Angeles, with its aircraft manufacturing plants and military installations, was considered a prime target. "What kind of aircraft sightings?" she asked. "Unidentified formations flying south along the coast," Lieutenant Torres answered. "Could be nothing, but headquarters is taking it seriously." Lieutenant Anderson leaned closer. "Word is that all available pilots might be scrambled if the reports turn out to be accurate. That means everyone, including—" He glanced at Sarah meaningfully. Sarah understood, including the woman pilot that many still considered a liability. "I'm ready," she said simply. Robert studied her face for a long moment. "Are you, though? Really ready? Because if enemy aircraft show up, this won't be a training exercise. There won't be any instructors watching over you or safety nets. It'll be real combat with real bullets and real consequences." The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that this might be her chance, the opportunity she had been waiting for to prove that she belonged in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. But it was also the chance to fail spectacularly in front of everyone who had doubted her. "I'm ready," she repeated, her voice steady and confident. As the four pilots walked toward the operations building, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The morning fog was lifting, revealing a clear blue sky. But somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, danger might be approaching. In the operations room, the radio chatter was more intense than usual. Intelligence officers huddled around maps and charts, tracking the movements of ships and aircraft along the Pacific coast. Sarah noticed that several pilots were being called in early for their shifts, and maintenance crews were working frantically to prepare additional aircraft for flight. Colonel Morrison emerged from his office and called for attention. "Gentlemen and lady," he added with a nod towards Sarah, "we're moving to heightened alert status. Intelligence has confirmed multiple unidentified aircraft approaching from the northwest. All pilots are to be ready for immediate scramble." The room buzzed with nervous energy. This could be it, the attack that everyone had been dreading and preparing for. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her hands remained steady. She had trained for this moment, even if others questioned her readiness. "Sir," Captain Roberts raised his hand, "what about pilot assignments?" Colonel Morrison's eyes swept the room, lingering for a moment on Sarah. "All available pilots will fly, no exceptions." Sarah met his gaze steadily. Whatever doubts he might have about her abilities, the situation was serious enough that they couldn't afford to keep any pilot on the ground. As the briefing continued with details about patrol routes and radio frequencies, Sarah mentally reviewed everything she had learned about air-to-air combat. She thought about the countless hours she had spent studying Japanese aircraft specifications, learning their strengths and weaknesses. She remembered the gunnery practice sessions where she had honed her shooting skills until she could hit targets that other pilots missed. Most importantly, she thought about why she was here. She wasn't flying to prove a point or to show up her male colleagues. She was flying to defend her country and protect the people she had sworn to serve. The radio operator suddenly called out, "Sir, we're getting reports of a large formation approaching Los Angeles from the west. Estimated 12 aircraft, type unknown." The room fell silent. 12 aircraft meant this wasn't a reconnaissance mission, it was a bombing run. Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the tension. "All pilots to your aircraft, this is not a drill." As Sarah ran toward her plane alongside her squadron mates, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The months of doubt and skepticism faded away, replaced by the clarity of purpose. Enemy bombers were heading toward American soil, and she was one of the pilots standing between them and their targets. The ground crew was already preparing her P-51 Mustang when she arrived at the flight line. The engine was warming up, and fuel trucks were topping off the tanks. Everything moved with the precise efficiency of a well-trained military unit. "She's all yours, Lieutenant," called Chief Mechanic Rodriguez as Sarah approached. "Full fuel, full ammunition, and all systems checked." Sarah nodded her thanks and began her pre-flight inspection. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine, checking control surfaces, examining the propeller and verifying that all external components were secure. But her mind was focused on what lay ahead. In less than 30 minutes, she would be airborne and possibly facing enemy aircraft in combat. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, had led to this moment. Sarah strapped herself into the cockpit of her P-51 Mustang, her fingers moving through the startup sequence with practiced precision. Around her, 11 other aircraft were preparing for takeoff. The morning that had started with routine patrol duties had suddenly become the most important mission of her military career. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader," Captain Roberts' voice came through her headset. "Form up for takeoff. We have confirmed reports of 12 enemy bombers approaching Los Angeles from the northwest at 15,000 feet. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls as she taxied into position. She was flying as Bluebird 2, which meant she would be Roberts' wingman. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same man who had questioned her abilities just hours earlier was now trusting her to protect his flanks in combat. "Bluebird 2, how do you read?" Roberts asked over the radio. "Bluebird 2, loud and clear, sir," Sarah responded. "Stay close and follow my lead. These bombers will likely have fighter escorts, so keep your eyes open." The 12 American fighters took off in formation, climbing rapidly into the clear morning sky. As they gained altitude, Sarah could see the sprawling city of Los Angeles stretching out below them. Somewhere down there, millions of people were going about their daily lives, unaware that enemy aircraft were approaching their city. Sarah adjusted her oxygen mask and checked her instrument panel. Everything was functioning normally. Her Mustang felt responsive and powerful beneath her hands. She had flown this particular aircraft dozens of times and knew every quirk and characteristic. Today, that familiarity might mean the difference between life and death. "Blue Squadron, this is ground control," the radio crackled. "Enemy formation bearing 270 at 15,000 feet, approximately 40 miles out. Estimated time to target 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Sarah did quick mental calculations. If the enemy bombers were targeting the aircraft manufacturing plants in the Los Angeles area, they could cause devastating damage to America's war production. The factories below were producing fighters and bombers for the Pacific Theater. Losing them would cripple the war effort. "Blue Squadron, climb to 20,000 feet, Roberts ordered. We'll come down on them from above." The formation climbed steadily through the morning air. At 20,000 feet, the temperature dropped significantly, and Sarah could see her breath fogging slightly inside her mask. She adjusted her heated suit controls and scanned the horizon ahead. "There," Lieutenant Torres called out, 2 o'clock level." Sarah looked in the indicated direction and spotted them, a formation of twin-engine aircraft flying in tight formation. Even at this distance, she could identify them as Japanese Mitsubishi G4M bombers, known to American pilots as Betty bombers. They were flying straight and level, apparently confident that no American fighters would intercept them. "I count 12 bombers," Roberts reported. "No visible escort fighters. Blue Squadron, prepare to attack." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but her hands remained steady. This was what she had trained for. All the hours of gunnery practice, all the tactical studies, all the criticism and doubt, everything had led to this moment. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader. We'll attack in 2 flights. Bluebirds 1 through 6 will take the lead bombers. Bluebirds 7 through 12 will target the trailing formation. Remember, these bombers are heavily armed. Don't fly straight and level behind them." Sarah was flying as Bluebird 2, which put her in the lead attack group. She would be following Roberts directly into combat against 6 enemy bombers. "Bluebird 2, stay on my wing," Roberts instructed. "We'll make our first pass from the left side and above. Aim for the engines." The American formation split into 2 groups and began their attack approach. Sarah could see the enemy bombers more clearly now. They were large, twin-engine aircraft with distinctive green camouflage patterns. She could also see the gun positions, defensive armament that could fire in multiple directions. As they closed the distance, Sarah noticed something that surprised her. The enemy bombers hadn't changed course or altitude. Either they hadn't spotted the approaching American fighters, or they were supremely confident in their defensive capabilities. "Bluebirds 1 and 2 attacking now," Roberts announced. Sarah followed Roberts into a steep diving attack toward the lead bomber. The enemy aircraft grew larger in her gun sight with each passing second. She could see the rear gunner turning his weapon toward them, and suddenly the air around her aircraft erupted with tracer bullets. Roberts opened fire first, his guns sending streams of bullets toward the bomber's left engine. Sarah lined up her shot carefully, just as she had practiced hundreds of times on the gunnery range. She squeezed the trigger, and her 6.50 caliber machine guns roared to life. Her aim was perfect. The bullets struck the bomber's right engine, and she saw pieces of metal flying off the cowling. Smoke began pouring from the engine, and she could see the propeller slowing down. "Good shooting, Bluebird 2," Roberts called out as they pulled up and away from the bomber. The damaged bomber began losing altitude, smoke trailing behind it. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but she knew the mission was far from over. 11 enemy bombers were still approaching Lowe's Angels. "Bluebirds 3 and 4, your turn," Roberts ordered. The next pair of American fighters dove toward the enemy formation. Sarah watched as they attacked another bomber, their guns flashing in the morning sunlight. The enemy gunners were firing back, filling the sky with defensive fire. Suddenly, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the American fighters, Bluebird 4, flown by Lieutenant Anderson, was hit by enemy fire. She could see smoke pouring from his engine and pieces of his aircraft falling away. "Bluebird 4 is hit," Torres called out. "Bill, can you make it back to base?" Anderson's voice came through the radio, strained but determined. "Negative, Blue Leader. I'm losing altitude fast. I'm going to try to ram one of these bombers." "Negative, Bluebird 4, Roberts shouted. "Bail out, bail out." But Anderson was already diving toward the enemy formation, his damaged fighter trailing smoke and fire. Sarah watched in horror and admiration as he aimed his crippled aircraft directly at one of the bombers. The collision was spectacular and terrible. Anderson's fighter struck the bomber just behind the cockpit, and both aircraft exploded in a ball of orange flame. Debris rained down toward the earth below. The loss of their comrade sent a surge of anger through the American formation. The remaining fighters attacked with renewed fury, diving and climbing through the enemy formation. The sky filled with gunfire and smoke as the aerial battle intensified. Sarah found herself separated from Roberts during the melee, facing a bomber that had broken away from the main formation. The enemy pilot was trying to escape by diving toward the ground, but Sarah was faster. She lined up behind the fleeing bomber and opened fire. Her bullets struck the aircraft's fuselage and left engine. The bomber shuddered under the impact but continued flying. The enemy rear gunner was firing at her, his bullets zipping past her cockpit. Sarah could hear them striking her aircraft, but none hit anything vital. She pressed her attack, closing the distance until she was firing from point-blank range. Her sustained fire finally paid off. The bomber's left engine caught fire and the aircraft began spinning out of control. She watched it fall toward the earth, smoke and flames streaming behind it. "Bluebird 2, nice work," Robert's voice came through her headset. "Reform on me at 15,000 feet. Sarah looked around and realized that the aerial battle had scattered the aircraft across several miles of sky. She could see American fighters chasing individual bombers in all directions. Some of the enemy aircraft were damaged and limping toward the ocean. Others had been shot down completely. As she climbed back to 15,000 feet, Sarah began to assess the situation. The enemy bombing formation had been completely disrupted. Instead of 12 bombers approaching Lowe's Angels in tight formation, there were now scattered individual aircraft trying to escape or complete their mission alone. "Blue Squadron, this is ground control," the radio announced. "Excellent work. We count at least 6 enemy bombers destroyed or severely damaged. The remaining aircraft are being pursued by additional fighter squadrons." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and pride. The enemy attack had been broken up before any bombers could reach their targets. Lowe's Angels was safe, at least for now. But the mission wasn't over yet. Several enemy aircraft were still in the area, and some might still be carrying their bomb loads. Every bomber that escaped meant potential targets along the coast could still be hit. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader," Roberts announced. "We're going to pursue the remaining bombers. They're heading back toward the ocean, but some might still have targets in mind." Sarah checked her fuel gauge and ammunition counter. She still had enough of both to continue the mission. Her aircraft had taken some hits from enemy gunfire, but all systems were functioning normally. As the American fighters regrouped and began pursuing the retreating enemy bombers, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. She had faced enemy aircraft in combat for the first time and had performed exactly as she had been trained. More importantly, she had helped protect her homeland from attack. The doubts about her ability to handle G-forces and keep up with her male colleagues now seemed irrelevant. In the heat of combat, there had been no time to question whether she was physically strong enough or emotionally tough enough. There had only been the mission and the need to complete it successfully. The pursuit of the remaining enemy bombers led the American fighters west toward the Pacific Ocean. Sarah flew in formation with the surviving members of Blue Squadron, scanning the sky for any sign of the retreating Japanese aircraft. The initial attack had broken up the enemy formation, but intelligence reports indicated that at least 4 bombers had escaped the first engagement. "Blue Squadron, this is ground control," the radio crackled. "We have radar contacts bearing 280, approximately 20 miles out and heading west, altitude unknown." Captain Roberts adjusted course immediately. "Blue Squadron, come left to heading 280, let's finish what we started." Sarah banked her P-51 Mustang to follow the new heading. As they flew west, she could see the California coastline below them. The beaches and coastal highways looked peaceful from altitude, but she knew that if any of those enemy bombers completed their mission, the scene below could change dramatically. Her aircraft had performed flawlessly during the first engagement, but she noticed some minor damage from enemy gunfire. There were several bullet holes in her wings, and one round had cracked the plexiglass of her canopy. None of the damage affected her flight controls or engine performance, but it served as a reminder of how close she had come to serious trouble. "There they are," Lieutenant Torres called out. 1 o'clock low, about 5 miles. Sarah looked in the indicated direction and spotted 3 enemy bombers flying in loose formation about 5,000 feet below them. The aircraft appeared to be heading directly toward the ocean, possibly trying to reach a rendezvous point with Japanese submarines. "I only see 3, Roberts observed. Intelligence said there were 4 escapees." "Maybe one went down over the ocean," suggested Lieutenant Martinez, flying as Bluebird 7. Sarah continued scanning the area and noticed something that the others had missed. About 2 miles south of the main group, flying much lower and closer to the coastline, was a 4th aircraft. It appeared to be damaged, with smoke trailing from one engine. "Blue Leader, this is Bluebird 2, she called out. "I have a visual on a 4th bomber bearing 180, flying very low near the coast." Roberts looked in the direction she indicated. "Good eyes, Bluebird 2. That one looks like it might be making a final attack run. Bluebirds 2, 3, and 4 break off and pursue that bomber. The rest of us will go after the main group." Sarah felt a surge of responsibility as she peeled away from the formation with 2 other fighters. The lone bomber flying near the coast was the most dangerous because it was closest to potential targets on shore. If it was carrying bombs, it could still inflict significant damage before escaping. As she dove toward the lone bomber, Sarah could see that it was indeed heavily damaged. The aircraft was flying at barely 3,000 feet, with smoke pouring from its left engine and visible holes in its fuselage. But it was still airborne and still potentially dangerous. "Bluebirds 2, 3, and 4, this is Bluebird 3, Lieutenant Torres' voice came through her headset. "That bomber is heading toward Santa Monica. There's a defense plant there." Sarah's heart raced as she realized the implications. The Douglas Aircraft Company had a major manufacturing facility in Santa Monica, producing vital military aircraft. If the enemy bomber was targeting that plant, it could set back American war production significantly. The 3 American fighters approached the damaged bomber from behind and above. Sarah could see the rear gunner tracking their approach, but the defensive fire seemed less intense than before. Either the gunner was wounded, or the aircraft's electrical systems had been damaged. "Bluebird 2, you take the first shot," Torres instructed. "We'll follow up if needed." Sarah lined up her approach carefully. The enemy bomber was flying slowly and predictably, making it an easier target than during the chaotic first engagement. But she also knew that wounded animals were often the most dangerous. She opened fire from 800 yards, her 6 machine guns sending streams of bullets toward the bomber's engines. Her aim was true, and she saw her rounds striking the aircraft's right engine and wing root. Pieces of metal flew off the bomber, and the engine began producing even more smoke. The enemy aircraft shuddered under the impact but continued flying. The rear gunner returned fire, his bullets passing uncomfortably close to Sarah's cockpit. She could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing nearby, but none struck her aircraft. "Good hits, Bluebird 2, Torres called out. "I'm going in for another pass." Torres dove toward the bomber from a different angle, forcing the enemy gunner to divide his attention between two targets. His attack was equally effective, with bullets striking the bomber's fuselage and causing visible damage to the control surfaces. The enemy bomber began losing altitude more rapidly, dropping toward the ocean below. But Sarah noticed that it was still heading toward the coastline, not away from it. The pilot might be planning a final kamikaze attack on a ground target. "Bluebird 4, this is Bluebird 2, she called to Lieutenant Martinez. "I think he's planning to crash into something on shore. We need to stop him now." Martinez understood immediately. "Roger, Bluebird 2, let's finish this." Sarah made her final attack approach, diving steeply toward the struggling bomber. This time, she held her fire until she was within 400 yards, ensuring maximum accuracy. When she pressed the trigger, her bullets struck the bomber's cockpit area and remaining good engine. The effect was immediate and decisive. The bomber's right engine caught fire, and the aircraft began spinning out of control. She watched as it crashed into the ocean about 2 miles offshore, sending up a huge plume of water and steam. "Splash 1 bomber," Torres announced with satisfaction. "Nice shooting, Bluebird 2. As the 3 American fighters reformed and headed back toward the main engagement, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not only performed effectively in her first air combat mission, but she had also prevented a potentially devastating attack on an important military target. The radio crackled with updates from the rest of Blue Squadron. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader. We've engaged the remaining 3 bombers. 2 confirmed destroyed, 1 heavily damaged and fleeing toward the ocean." "Blue Leader, this is Ground Control. Excellent work. All enemy bombers have been accounted for. Return to base for debriefing." The flight back to March Field Air Base gave Sarah time to process what had just happened. In the space of 2 hours, she had gone from being questioned about her ability to handle combat to shooting down 2 enemy bombers and helping protect the West Coast from attack. More importantly, she had proven to herself and her colleagues that gender had nothing to do with flying ability or combat effectiveness. When enemy aircraft threatened American soil, the only thing that mattered was the skill and determination of the pilots defending it. As the squadron approached the airfield, Sarah could see fire trucks and ambulances standing by, along with what appeared to be a large crowd of personnel gathered near the flight line. Word of the successful interception had obviously spread quickly throughout the base. "Blue Squadron, this is Tower Control. You're cleared for landing. Congratulations on a successful mission." Sarah touched down smoothly on runway 1 and taxied to her assigned parking spot. As she shut down her engine and began her post-flight procedures, she could see ground crew members running toward her aircraft. Their faces showed excitement and admiration rather than the skepticism she had grown accustomed to. Chief Mechanic Rodriguez was the first to reach her aircraft as she climbed out of the cockpit. "Lieutenant Chen, we heard you got 2 of them. Is that right?" Sarah removed her flying helmet and nodded. "2 confirmed, Chief. The aircraft performed perfectly." Rodriguez beamed with pride. "Wait until the other mechanics hear about this. We've been working on this bird for months, and now she's a combat veteran." As Sarah walked across the flight line, she was approached by Colonel Morrison and several other senior officers. Their expressions were serious, but she could detect a new level of respect in their manner. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Morrison began, "I understand you performed exceptionally well today. Captain Roberts has given me a preliminary report, and I wanted to congratulate you personally." "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "Yes, you were," Morrison agreed. "And you did it very well indeed. I think it's safe to say that any questions about your combat readiness have been answered definitively." Behind Morrison, Sarah could see Captain Roberts approaching with the other pilots from the mission. Their faces showed a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that she was beginning to recognize as the aftermath of successful combat. "Chen," Roberts called out as he approached. "That was some fine shooting out there, especially that last bomber near the coast. You probably saved a lot of lives today." The other pilots gathered around, and Sarah found herself the center of attention in a way that felt completely different from the scrutiny she had experienced before. This time, the attention was based on admiration for her performance rather than doubt about her capabilities. Lieutenant Torres clapped her on the shoulder. "I have to admit, I had my doubts when you first joined the squadron, but after today, I'd be honored to fly as your wingman anytime." The acceptance felt genuine and hard-earned. Sarah realized that she had crossed an invisible line during the mission. She was no longer the female pilot who might or might not be able to handle combat. She was simply a pilot who had proven herself when it mattered most. As the group walked toward the operations building for debriefing, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. The morning had started with routine doubts about weather conditions and flying capabilities. It was ending with confirmation that she belonged in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft just as much as any of her male colleagues. But more than personal vindication, she felt satisfaction in knowing that she had helped protect innocent civilians from enemy attack. That was why she had wanted to become a fighter pilot in the first place, not to prove a point about gender equality, but to serve her country and defend freedom. The debriefing session in the operations building was unlike any Sarah had experienced during her months of training and routine patrols. Instead of sitting quietly in the back while senior officers discussed her performance, she found herself at the center of attention as intelligence officers asked detailed questions about the enemy aircraft and tactics. "Lieutenant Chen," said Major Patricia Williams from Air Force Intelligence, "you were the first pilot to spot the lone bomber heading toward the coast. Can you describe exactly what you observed about its flight pattern and apparent condition?" Sarah leaned forward in her chair, consulting the notes she had made immediately after landing. The aircraft appeared to be a Mitsubishi G4M, same as the others, but it was flying significantly lower and slower than the main formation. Heavy smoke was coming from the left engine, and I could see visible damage to the fuselage and wings. Did the aircraft appear to be attempting to return to base, or was it taking an attack approach toward shore targets? Sarah had been thinking about this question since the engagement ended. Based on its heading and altitude, I believe the pilot was making a deliberate attack run toward Santa Monica. The aircraft was flying too low for a safe return flight over ocean, and the heading was too precise to be random. Major Williams made notes on her clipboard. "Your assessment matches what we've determined from radar tracking. That bomber was definitely targeting the Douglas aircraft facility. Your intervention likely prevented significant damage to our aircraft production." Captain Roberts, sitting nearby, added his own observations. Lieutenant Chen's gunnery was exceptional throughout the engagement. She scored confirmed hits on 2 enemy bombers, including the final aircraft that posed the greatest threat to ground targets. Colonel Morrison nodded approvingly. "I've been reviewing the preliminary reports from all squadron members, and the consensus is clear. Lieutenant Chen performed at the highest level during her first combat mission." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and relief. After months of proving herself in training exercises and routine flights, she had finally demonstrated her capabilities in actual combat. But she was also aware that this mission, successful as it had been, was just the beginning. "Sir," she said, "what's our status for future missions? Intelligence reports suggest this attack was probably a probing action rather than an isolated incident." Morrison's expression grew serious. "You're correct, Lieutenant. This appears to have been a reconnaissance in force, testing our coastal defenses and response times. We expect additional attacks in the coming days or weeks." The sobering reality settled over the room. Today's successful defense was just one battle in what would likely be a prolonged campaign to protect the West Coast from enemy attack. Major Williams closed her notebook and addressed the group. "I want to thank all of you for your detailed reports. The information you've provided will be essential for planning our defensive strategies. Lieutenant Chen, your observations about enemy tactics and aircraft performance are particularly valuable." As the formal debriefing concluded, Sarah found herself walking outside with Captain Roberts and several other squadron members. The afternoon sun was beginning to set over the California hills, casting long shadows across the airfield. "Chen," Roberts said, his tone more relaxed than she had ever heard it, "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "Sir, I was wrong to question your readiness for combat duty. Today proved that pilot ability has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, training, and determination. Lieutenant Torres nodded in agreement. We all learned something today. I've been flying for 3 years, and I'm not sure I could have spotted that lone bomber the way you did. The group paused near the flight line, where maintenance crews were working to repair battle damage on several aircraft. Sarah's P-51 was undergoing inspection for the bullet holes and minor damage it had sustained during the engagement. The thing is, Roberts continued, combat flying is different from everything we do in training. You never really know how someone will perform until they face real enemy fire. Today, you proved that you can handle the pressure and make the right decisions when lives are on the line. Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she also realized that acceptance from her squadron mates was just part of a larger challenge. I'm grateful for your confidence, sir, but I know that there will be other tests ahead. There will, Roberts agreed. But now you'll face them as a proven combat pilot, not as someone who has to justify her presence in the cockpit. As the group dispersed, Sarah walked alone toward her quarters, reflecting on the day's events. The morning's routine patrol had transformed into a life-changing combat mission that had established her credibility once and for all. But beyond personal vindication, she thought about the broader significance of what had happened. Enemy forces had attempted to attack American soil, and they had been stopped by the skill and courage of American pilots. The defense of the homeland was not a theoretical concept. It was a real and immediate responsibility. That evening, Sarah joined her squadron mates in the officers' club for what had become an impromptu celebration of their successful mission. The atmosphere was markedly different from previous social gatherings. Instead of polite conversation and careful observation, she found herself included naturally in discussions about flying techniques, combat tactics, and aircraft performance. The thing about the G4M, Lieutenant Martinez was explaining to a group gathered around a small table, is that it's fast but not very maneuverable. Once you get behind one, you can usually stay there long enough to do some real damage. Chen found that out today, Torres added with a grin. She put some beautiful shooting on that bomber near the coast. Sarah found herself discussing the technical aspects of air combat with pilots who had previously treated her as an outsider. The conversation was professional and respectful, focused on the mission rather than on her gender or supposed limitations. Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson, the base operations officer, approached their table with a serious expression. "Lieutenant Chen, may I speak with you privately?" Sarah followed Peterson to a quieter corner of the club, wondering what this conversation might be about. Peterson was known as a fair but demanding officer who rarely socialized with junior pilots. "Lieutenant," Peterson began, "I've been reviewing the reports from today's mission, and I want you to know that your performance has been noted at the highest levels. General MacArthur's headquarters has specifically requested details about the pilot who prevented the attack on the Santa Monica facility." Sarah was stunned. "Sir, I was just doing my duty." "Yes, you were, and you did it exceptionally well. I want you to know that there are people in high places who are very interested in your continued development as a combat pilot." Peterson paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "There's something else you should know. Your success today is going to attract attention beyond just military circles. The press corps has gotten word of a female pilot's role in defending Lowe's Angels, and they're very interested in the story." The implications began to sink in. Sarah had joined the military to serve her country, not to become a public figure or symbol. "Sir, I'd prefer to focus on my duties rather than publicity." "I understand and respect that, Lieutenant. But you should be prepared for the possibility that your story might become public knowledge, whether you want it to or not. Your performance today represents something significant, proof that women can serve effectively in combat roles." As Peterson returned to his own table, Sarah contemplated this new development. She had struggled for months to be accepted by her fellow pilots as simply another member of the squadron. Now, she faced the possibility of becoming a public symbol of female achievement in military service. The conversation in the officers' club continued around her, with pilots sharing stories and discussing tactics. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere, thinking about the responsibilities that came with her newfound status as a proven combat pilot. Later that night, as she prepared for sleep in her quarters, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in a single day. She had awakened that morning as a pilot whose abilities were still questioned by some of her colleagues. She was ending the day as a combat veteran whose performance had earned respect and recognition. But she also understood that this was just the beginning. The enemy attack had been repelled, but it was unlikely to be the last attempt. Future missions would bring new challenges and dangers, and she would need to maintain the high standards she had set for herself. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last conscious thought was about Lieutenant Anderson, the pilot who had sacrificed his life to destroy an enemy bomber. His courage and dedication reminded her that military service was about something much larger than personal achievement or recognition. It was about protecting the values and freedoms that made America worth defending. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and challenges. But tonight, she could rest with the knowledge that when her country had needed her, she had answered the call with skill, courage, and determination. The doubts about her ability to handle G-forces and keep up with her male colleagues had been permanently laid to rest in the skis over California. 3 weeks after the successful defense against the enemy bomber formation, Sarah found herself facing an entirely different kind of challenge. The morning mail had brought a thick envelope from the War Department, along with several newspaper clippings and magazine articles that mentioned her name and role in the Lowe's Angels defense. The letter from Washington was formal and congratulatory, signed by General Henry Arnold himself. It commended her exceptional performance in defense of the homeland and informed her that she was being considered for several prestigious assignments, including a possible transfer to a new experimental squadron that would test advanced fighter aircraft. But it was the newspaper articles that troubled her most. Headlines like "Lady Fighter Pilot Saves Lowe's Angels" and "Woman Warrior Downs Enemy Bombers" made her sound more like a publicity stunt than a professional military pilot. The articles focused more on her gender than her flying skills, exactly the kind of attention she had hoped to avoid. A knock on her door interrupted her reading. Captain Roberts entered her quarters with his usual direct manner, but she could see concern in his expression. "Chen, we need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from her small desk. "Have you seen the newspapers?" Sarah gestured toward the clippings scattered across her desk. "Unfortunately, yes, sir. It seems my story has gotten more attention than I expected." Roberts picked up one of the articles and scanned it quickly. "Some of this is good publicity for the squadron and the Air Force in general, but I'm concerned about how it might affect your ability to do your job." "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean that you're about to become the most famous female pilot in America, and that comes with pressures and expectations that have nothing to do with flying airplanes. The War Department is going to want to use you for publicity and recruitment purposes." Sarah had been dreading this exact conversation. "Sir, I didn't join the military to become a poster girl for women's advancement. I joined to serve my country as a fighter pilot." Roberts nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the answer I hoped to hear, but you need to understand that this decision might not be entirely up to you. Your performance 3 weeks ago was exceptional, and it proved something that a lot of people in Washington wanted to see proved." He leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. "The truth is, there are people in high places who have been looking for an opportunity to expand women's roles in combat positions. Your success gives them the ammunition they need to make their case." Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. On one hand, she was proud that her performance might help other women gain opportunities in military aviation. On the other hand, she worried about being reduced to a symbol rather than being valued as an individual pilot. "Sir, what are you recommending?" "I'm recommending that you continue doing exactly what you've been doing, being the best pilot you can be and focusing on the mission. Let the politicians and publicity people worry about the larger implications. Your job is to fly and fight." A messenger arrived with another official envelope, this one marked "Priority Personal Delivery." Sarah opened it and found orders transferring her to Wright Field in Ohio for a 2-week evaluation period with the Army Air Forces Test Pilot School. Roberts read the orders over her shoulder and whistled softly. "Test Pilot School? That's a significant opportunity, Chen. They only send their best pilots there." Sarah studied the orders carefully. Wright Field was where the military's most advanced aircraft were tested and evaluated. It was also where new tactics and technologies were developed for combat use. An assignment that would be both an honor and a tremendous challenge. "Sir, do you think this is a genuine recognition of my abilities, or is it part of the publicity campaign?" Roberts considered the question seriously. Probably both. But here's the thing, test pilot school doesn't care about publicity. If you can't handle the flying, you'll wash out regardless of your public relations value. It's one of the most demanding assignments in military aviation. Over the following days, Sarah prepared for her temporary assignment to Ohio while continuing her regular duties with the squadron. The base had settled into a routine of heightened alertness following the enemy attack, with regular patrols and training exercises designed to maintain readiness for future threats. During this period, Sarah noticed that her relationship with her squadron mates had evolved significantly. The doubts and skepticism that had characterized her early months with the unit had been replaced by genuine respect and camaraderie. She was no longer the female pilot who might or might not be able to handle combat. She was simply Lieutenant Chen, a proven fighter pilot who happened to be a woman. Lieutenant Torres approached her during a break between training flights. "Chen, I heard about your assignment to Wright Field. That's quite an honor." "Thank you. I'm nervous about it, to be honest. Test flying is a completely different kind of challenge from combat flying." Torres nodded thoughtfully. "True, but the skills that made you successful in combat will serve you well as a test pilot. You have excellent situational awareness, precise flying technique, and the ability to stay calm under pressure." The encouragement from her colleagues meant more to Sarah than any official recognition or newspaper article. These were fellow pilots who had seen her perform under the most challenging conditions possible and found her worthy of their respect. On her last day before departing for Ohio, Colonel Morrison called her into his office for a final briefing. His manner was formal but warm, reflecting the change in their professional relationship since the bomber attack. "Lieutenant Chen," he began, "I want you to know that this assignment to Wright Field reflects very favorably on both you and this squadron. Test pilot school is extremely selective, and they don't waste their time on pilots who can't handle advanced aircraft and experimental procedures." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the confidence." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more personal. "I'll be honest with you, Lieutenant. When you first arrived at this base, I had concerns about integrating a female pilot into a combat squadron. Those concerns weren't based on doubts about your flying ability. Your training records were excellent. I was worried about unit cohesion and the reactions of the other pilots." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "I understand, sir. Change is always challenging. What I learned from the events of 3 weeks ago is that combat has a way of reducing everything to its essential elements. When enemy bombers are approaching American targets, nobody cares about the gender of the pilots defending against them. They only care about whether those pilots can do their jobs effectively." Morrison stood and extended his hand. "You've proven that you can do your job as well as any pilot I've commanded. I expect you to continue proving it at Wright Field and wherever your career takes you after that." As Sarah prepared to leave March Field for her assignment in Ohio, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival months earlier. She had faced skepticism, doubt, and outright hostility from some quarters. But through persistence, skill, and a bit of luck, she had earned her place as a respected member of the squadron. The newspaper clippings and official recognition were gratifying, but they weren't what mattered most to her. What mattered was knowing that she had served her country effectively when it counted, and that she had opened doors for other women who might follow in her path. The flight to Ohio gave her time to think about the future. Test pilot school would present new challenges and opportunities to prove herself all over again. But she was no longer the uncertain pilot who had worried about being accepted by her colleagues. She was now a combat veteran with confirmed victories and the respect of her peers. As her transport aircraft crossed the American heartland, Sarah looked down at the farms and cities below and thought about the responsibility that came with her newfound status. She was no longer flying just for herself, or even just for her squadron. She was flying for every woman who dreamed of serving in combat roles, and for every American who depended on military pilots to defend their freedom. The doubts about her ability to handle G-forces and keep up with male pilots seemed like ancient history now. Those questions had been answered definitively in the skies over California when 12 enemy bombers threatened Lowe's Angels. Her response to that threat had proven that courage, skill, and determination were not limited by gender. The future would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve. But whatever lay ahead, Sarah faced it with the confidence that comes from having been tested under fire and found worthy of the trust placed in her. She was no longer a woman trying to prove she could be a pilot. She was a pilot who happened to be a woman, and that distinction made all the difference in the world. As the transport began its descent toward Wright Field, Sarah prepared for the next chapter of her military career. Test pilot school would be demanding, dangerous, and highly competitive. But she had already proven that she could succeed in the most challenging circumstances military aviation could offer. The story that had begun with doubts about her physical capabilities and questions about her place in a combat squadron was ending with recognition of her achievements and opportunities for even greater service. But most importantly, it was ending with the knowledge that barriers could be broken, and stereotypes could be overcome through competence, courage, and unwavering dedication to duty. The young woman who had once faced skeptical looks and whispered questions about her ability to handle military aircraft was now a decorated combat pilot heading to one of the most prestigious assignments in military aviation. The transformation was complete, and the legacy was secure.